The Tay is one of my favorite places in the world. I live on the Tay, quite a bit upstream from here, just below Christie Lake. But it is one of these wonderful little ecosystems that's full of wonderful natural heritage and wonderful human heritage too. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on the Tay as it pertains to this particular neck of the woods here at the bottom. This is a story that we've got patriots or traders, ruffians, entrepreneurs, all depending on your point of view. And that's kind of what history is all about, is how you come at it. And the patriot-trader connection, well, that's Benedict Arnold. And you're probably familiar with him as associated with the American Revolution, where he was one of the great generals of the American Revolution on the American side, and then famously switched sides partway through the Revolution to fight for the British. And again, depending on your point of view, whether he was a patriot or a traitor. But anyways, in return for this switching sides, he received 13,000 acres in British North America. And this was located in New Brunswick in Upper Canada. And where we are today is part of that 13,000 acre land grant. So we have a connection here to one of the great individuals of history. Now, Benedict Arnold never came to Upper Canada. He did go to New Brunswick. He lived in New Brunswick for a few years and tried to make a go of things there, not very successfully. But he had agents here in Upper Canada, and that was the Weatherhead family, Samuel Weatherhead and his son Alexander. And they were originally based in Maitland, but in return for services to General Arnold, they received land here. And they eventually came up here, and they founded the community of Barbados. And this was in honor of Samuel Weatherhead's birthplace. That is where he was originally born, and he had a very storied life, getting obviously from Barbados in the West Indies to Barbados, Upper Canada. And in fact, one of his daughters actually married a son of Benedict Arnold. So there is a connection, a family connection there between the two of them. And actually another one of Benedict Arnold's illegitimate son actually settled here, and he is buried south of Smith Falls. So there is a connection here between them. Anyways, the Weatherheads were very, very ambitious people. They saw the potential of Pike Falls, which is where they were, and the fishing falls. The Tay was actually originally called the Pike River. But when the British military came in with the founding of the Perth Military Settlement in 1816, and 3 boatloads of Scottish settlers from Glasgow came into the area, they started renaming everything, and so that's where Perth upon Tay came from. And you can imagine the reason why it was called the Pike River, because there's quite a bit of pike swimming through there. And the fishing falls, well, that was actually a commercial fishery for a number of years in the early years. It was a great place to stretch nets across and feed your family and maybe sell a little bit on the side. Anyways, the Weatherheads saw the commercial opportunities there, and by 1829 they had thrown up a dam and a sawmill. Sawmills tended to be the first industry that was built because you've got trees that are cutting down, and what do you do with them? Now this little action of throwing up the dam and the sawmill on the Tay River just before the mouth of the Tay managed to really tick some people off in Perth, big time. And because really what this meant was that the Weatherheads controlled the Tay River. Now, to put this into a broader perspective, the Rideau Canal was under construction by this time. It had started in 1826. And while it was built as a military supply route to connect Montreal to Kingston, sort of a back door, so that when the Americans attacked again, and everyone thought they would after the War of 1812, that they could get troops into Upper Canada more easily. So even though it was a military supply route, everybody saw the commercial opportunity. That's why people were coming here. They wanted to make something for themselves. Perth, like all the other little communities, Marrickville, Burrett's Rapids, Chiffies, tried to get the canal to go through them. Perth was unsuccessful. It's a little bit off the beaten track. But that didn't stop them. And actually all during this period, because it took a while before the canal started being built, people were thinking, well, how am I going to get there? How am I going to get my goods to market in Montreal? There's no roads here, so water is the only way. So when Weatherhead threw up his dam, people in Perth said, okay, that's it. We've had enough. We're not waiting anymore for government or anybody else. We're going to do this ourselves. So William Morris, who was one of the prominent members of the Perth community. He was an early merchant, and he was also a retired La Pape officer. from the Glengarry Light Fencibles. He petitioned the Upper Canadian Legislature, and they passed an act of Parliament in 1831, forming the Tay Navigation Company. And that is what got the whole ball finally started. They drew up plans for 4 locks, 3 that would be where Port Elmsley is today, and then a 4th one at the mouth of Gibbs Creek. Now the Tay Navigation Company, they had good intentions, but an awful lot of bad luck and insufficient resources. And they tried to get money, they had a budget, but like all construction projects, as you know, the minute you start putting the shovel in the ground, surprises occur. And the biggest surprise that occurred for the Tay Navigation Company was the need for a 5th lock. They didn't have a budget for the 5th lock, but they needed to put one in, and that became lock number 4, which is up here. So the first lock were 1, 2, and 3, and then lock number 5, but they needed to put in a 5th lock, which became lock number 4 right here. Because they hadn't budgeted for this lock, they had to build it out of wood. So poor materials right there. Now this canal was being built around about the same time as the Rideau Canal. The Rideau Canal was being built from 26 to 32, and the Tay Canal from 31 to 34. Colonel Bye, who was the engineer in charge of the Rideau Canal, he was a visionary. Even though he was instructed to build a military canal, which meant locks just big enough to pass gunboats, so very small, kind of like what you see in Europe, he saw the commercial opportunities too, and plus at the same time you've got steamboats coming. Big steamboats that can move great distances, transport a great number of goods. The Rideau also has an awful lot of water. We're in a lot of it this week. And so he has some different things that he has to consider, and he takes the initiative to build bigger locks than he was actually authorized to do. Everyone thought he was nuts and insane, and in fact he was pilloried by the House of Commons afterwards, and he died a broken man. He also went over budget by about 2%, but that was just, he was severely scolded for that too. Anyway, so he built these big locks. The Tay Canal built smaller locks of a poor quality, only rubble masonry. Now people would say, why did they do that? That was pretty silly when the Rideau was building the big locks. Well, actually the Tay Canal, they were building according to conventional wisdom. And in fact, the Royal Engineers did come and take a look at them. Morris managed to get them to go through it, and they said, yeah, what you're doing is fine. In retrospect, it was not fine for a number of reasons. One, they had budgeted for locks, so that put them into debt. And then the weather that we have here. We have lots of ice and snow in the winter time, fairly fierce breakups in spring, and so they weren't built to a standard that could withstand our weather here in Upper Canada. The Tay Canal also had some limitations from a commercial point of view. Because it was built to smaller dimensions, it couldn't handle steamboats. The Tay Navigation did build a flagship called the Enterprise, and it sailed off from Perth in the spring of 1834 to great fanfare, and immediately got stuck at the Craig Street Bridge. They were stuck there for quite some time. They broke out the booze and made everybody happy because there was all the shareholders on board, and their family got on their way, and that was the last Perth ever saw the Enterprise. So because they couldn't get steamships up to Perth, it had become a barge canal. And there was a towpath, and the towpath is still there. If you come down from Perth, it's actually part of the Rideau Trail. We've got the little orange triangles. And it's a very, very nice walk. And you can walk down, actually, as far as lock number 5. Dowson's, there's a stone house there, and that's the Dowson homestead. Quite a nice little walk. So because they couldn't bring steamships in, they had to have a transshipment point. Now the natural thing would be to have it at lock number 1, but the weatherheads controlled the lock number 1. They had warehouses here. So they were forced to go out to Stonehouse Island, and that was where the Perth landing was, out in the lower Rideau Lake. This was not very convenient, and a number of merchants chose not to use the Stonehouse Island transshipment point because it was more expensive, because you had a longer barge route, and would use Leatherhead's warehouses. So it became a barge canal, and it did help improve. It did allow people to bring goods in and out, but it never generated the revenue that was needed to improve it, maintain it, and basically get it out of debt. By the 1860s, the locks, the 5 locks, were in ruins. This was also, the decline of the locks was also hastened because it was used as a timber run in the springtime. So you would have the great stands of timber coming from the Perth area down the Tay, and it kind of hastened the destruction of the locks. So by the 1860s, the locks were in ruins. We leap ahead a couple of decades to the 1880s. Canals are beginning to enjoy a resurgence of popularity. They're still seen as a viable method for transporting freight. Mining starts to open up in this area, the Perth and Port Elmsley area. John Haggart, who is the MP for the area and a prosperous mill owner in Perth, manages to convince the Public Works Department to buy the assets of the now defunct Tay Navigation Company. He was ridiculed quite mightily in the House of Commons. There were several debates over the matter about all the money that was going to be invested in this tiny, tiny little backwater canal, and where was the money to justify it. There really wasn't, but the convincing argument that managed to get the canal rebuilt was actually water. And that has been the thing all along about this, is water management. A few years prior to this, the Rideau Canal experienced low levels of water, causing great financial hardship for the mill owners in Marrickville and Manotick. Member of Parliament for Manotick also happened as Moss Kent Dickinson, who owned Watson's Mill, so a powerful businessman. And so he came on board, and they said, yes, we have to have water, a steady supply of water for our businesses. And so that was the clinching argument to get the canal rebuilt. Here they corrected some of the mistakes that the Tay Navigation Company made. Instead of coming through Port Elmsley, they decided to do the dry cut through Beverages Bay, reducing the number of locks from 5 to 2. They built them to the same standards as those on the Rideau, so they could allow steamboats to come up to Perth. Unfortunately for Port Elmsley, the village was bypassed, and it helped hasten its demise. Port Elmsley was quite busy at that time. There was a cheese factory, there was a woolen mill, mining was starting up, there was the graphite mill, and by 1900 the new owners of the graphite mill invested $100,000 in it, because they obviously thought that there was enough graphite in the area to make this a viable operation. They also provided housing for 50 workers, so a real boom. The village would probably, this is sort of the most active area of the village, is in the late 19th century. The revised Tay Canal also did not succeed as a commercial venture. The businesses in Port Elmsley, where they had a little train between the village and Beverages Locks in order to get to the steamboat, so it was a little bit inconvenient. Mining didn't come out to be like what we thought. This isn't Sudbury. So the deposits just weren't there. But the canal started to become a tourist destination. This is the rise of leisure. This is the first time that middle-class people, working people, can afford to take holidays. You start getting cottages on the Rideau, steamboats start offering pleasure cruises, and so that is the start of what we know of the Tay Canal today. It's just a wonderful place to spend an afternoon, a summer, a lifetime enjoying it. Thank you very much.